Acting Deputy President, I rise to speak on the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Amendment Benefit to Australia Bill 2020. And I would note first and foremost that while the aim of this bill is a worthy one, it is unfortunately flawed in a way that would result in unintended consequences that may in fact have the opposite effect of its original intention. I agree with the comments made in closing by Senator Hanson, particularly around the way business operates and the importance of legislation, importance of our roles in determining legislation in this place. But I do need to talk about the specifics of this legislation amendment. The legal system relies on explicit wording of legislation and clear definitions. By making the term "for the benefit of the Australian community" open to interpretation by the courts, we would allow radical environmental groups to tie up any projects in legal fights. And it is not out of the realm of possibility that activist groups would use this amended objective to make the argument that an activity such as drilling an offshore well to recover oil or gas would contribute to climate change or have an environmental impact, therefore arguing that it does not benefit the Australian community. This legislation amendment will expose the gas industry and potentially the entire resources sector to green lawfare and drive industry investment away from Australia. This will, of course, be disastrous for our economy, but for Australian workers and Australian businesses who are benefiting from the investments into these developments, and would severely constrict, we would be providing them with another opportunity, Senator Hanson, would severely constrict the regional Australia's ability to support businesses and families. I also want to touch on Senator Hanson's comments with regard to the PRT returns and company tax returns. I think what is not well understood is that when these investments are made into these projects, it is billions of dollars in not just capital investment but also precursory environmental and other reviews, and that costs a huge amount of money, which is able to be offset on part of the tax calculations, and remembering that those dollars are spent in Australia with Australian companies employing Australian workers. While this bill talks about community benefit, it is clear that mining in this country does already benefit the community in ways that may not appear on annual profit and loss statements. And if we want to look at industry figures, the resources sector as a whole supports over 1.1 million direct and indirect jobs within Australia, contributing over $32.6 billion in direct salaries in 2021. The government has even acknowledged that the resources sector is to thank for a $50 billion budget boost this year and a brighter than expected fiscal outlook for Australia. The Australian oil and gas industry directly and indirectly supports over 80,000 jobs, contributed over $5.35 billion in tax in 2019-20 and recorded a $15.9 billion surplus in the trade of oil and gas. Now, over the past decade, the oil and gas industry paid more than $64.4 billion to the government, with contributions spanning decades totalling $161 billion since the mid-80s. This contribution is not limited to taxes. Now, over the last decade, the oil and gas industry has invested around $473 billion in the Australian economy. This includes about $170 billion spent directly since 2007 on 5 offshore LNG projects, which includes Pluto, Gorgon, Wheatstone, Ithacus and Prelude. And as of the last year, there are $120 billion worth of projects in the pipeline. That means more jobs in construction, supply chains and new operations. But we do potentially risk these investments with the introduction of the government's 43% emissions reduction legislation, the Queensland government's increase in coal royalties, and potentially this amendment, all of which goes to undermine confidence in investment in this country. Opponents of gas, coal and mining in general are quick to point out tax and royalty payments are less than they believe they ought to be. But the full value of our resources sector is found to be away from the balance sheets, the prospectuses and annual reports. It is in the high-paying jobs, both in the regions and in the metropolitan company head offices. It's in the sponsorship of sporting teams, events and community groups. Superannuation funds and shareholders rely on a profitable resources sector to supplement their incomes and pay for their retirement. This money flows through local businesses, creating employment which is also taxed, generating more revenue for the government. Just as mining's ripple effect on the economy is far-reaching, so too any impost on the mining and resources sector will be felt far away from the pits, the pipelines and corporate boardrooms. Already in Queensland, we are seeing big miners pull out of projects due to the state governments imposing the world's highest coal royalties. This reduced investment in regional Australia is disastrous for engineering firms, food suppliers, workwear stores and everyone employed directly and indirectly by the mining and resources sector. Many of these businesses are run by families. They're not driving limousines or flying in private jets. They're cementing a future for their kids, providing apprenticeships and sponsoring local netball and football teams. Rugby clubs such as the Capella Cattle Dogs and Emerald Rams in central Queensland would struggle to survive without sponsorships by local businesses engaged by the resources sector. Far more community support from resources companies operating in Queensland. We can point to $1 million to build a new centre for the AEIOU Foundation in Townsville, which specialises in teaching children with autism. $6 million for the Banana Shire Library, Museum and Community Hub. $8 million for 16 affordable housing units in Isaac Shire. $4.5 million for a pool in Mount Morgan. $7.8 million for a pool in Charters Towers. $834,000 for a sports facility upgrade at Cloncurry. The list goes on, and this is a snapshot of just one of the hundreds of resources companies operating in Australia that give back to local organisations and enriching small businesses. And I can guarantee you that this Labor government would not be directing any additional royalties back to those regional communities. Taking just one example from a submission to the committee examining this bill, Chevron stated that over the past decade, during the construction of Gorgon and Wheatzone, jobs and industry opportunities surge, with over $60 billion spent on local content. Post-construction, the plants have an operating budget over $1 billion a year, delivering high-paying jobs and local contracts with local content of over 80%. These projects supply domestic gas to Western Australian customers, supporting local jobs throughout the state and cleaner generation of electricity. And over the past decade, Chevron has paid $5.8 billion in taxes and royalties. By the mid-20s, we expect to be paying around $2 billion a year in taxes and royalties. And this is just one company. Is this not already a benefit for Australian communities? Across the industry, this has meant more export earnings, investments, taxes and royalties, something that benefits all Australians, as it provides the funds governments use to invest in infrastructure, education and social services. And as the Australian Petroleum Production and Exploration Association said in their submission to the Senate Economics Legislation Committee's inquiry into this bill, APIA supports and agrees that the development of natural resources should be for the benefit of the Australian community. And the effect of this amendment, however, will do the opposite and stymie investment. Claims that companies are hoarding resources has been proved incorrect, and changing the objects clauses of the Act under which hundreds of billions of dollars of investment have been made drastically increases Australian sovereign risk for no material gain. The resources sector currently operates for the benefit of the Australian community, and the addition of this unnecessary amendment has the potential to simply shut down projects and drive investment offshore. The Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Act 2006 provides for the safe and responsible operation of offshore oil and gas activities. It ensures that risks to safety and the environment are reduced as low as reasonably practicable. It also ensures that industry meets the requirements of good oil field practice and ensures that the recovery of oil and gas is at its optimal level. One Nation's proposed amendment alters the objectives of the existing Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Act 2006 by adding the following clause: to ensure that the exploitation of these natural resources is for the benefit of the Australian community. Now, while this change may seem innocent enough, in effect it injects a major ambiguity and uncertainty into the Act. Poorly drafted amendments, as proposed today, can be hijacked and have serious unintended consequences that would undermine future resources investment. We are constantly told these days that words have consequences, and it is definitely true in the case of this bill. The Coalition has previously spoken in opposition to the bill due to the broad nature of the amendment and unnecessary wording, which has the potential to open offshore petroleum exploration and development to legal challenges. The Greens supported the same bill last time with amendments that defined community benefit as relating to the effects of climate change and oil and gas's contribution to temperature rises. And in applying this definition to that community benefit term, the Greens proved the bill's wording can be utilised against the sector to push extreme anti-development agendas. So I've already touched on the legal system relying on explicit wording of legislation and clear definitions. But this term, for the benefit of the Australian community, open to interpretation by the courts, we would allow radical environmental groups to tie up any projects in legal fights. It is clear from even the most cursory look at resources contribution to our society that any moving at the regulatory levers must be meticulously considered and only done as a last resort, especially if there are moves to decrease the profitability of these companies via increased royalties and taxes. We have already seen in Queensland the Labor government's royalty increase send shockwaves, not just through the coal sector, but through all mining activities. And while Queensland Labor claims they are doing this to benefit the community, the early signs are that it will result in long-term harm for regional communities. Federally, we have seen the introduction of new requirements in the investment objectives of a number of government agencies like Infrastructure Australia and NAIF, hamstringing investment in industries like the gas industry and sending signals to investors that the government does not support the industry. Australia must understand that this is a highly competitive space, that we must continue to present ourselves as a viable, responsible and appealing investment opportunity to ensure that we continue to benefit from this sector. Over 70% of our nation's income is drawn from mining and resource activities, and not to mention the highly paid salaries, the regional investment that allows towns like Dalby, like Chinchilla, like Cloncurry to be thriving with the activity of mining in this country. Poorly drafted amendments can be hijacked and that have serious unintended consequences would further undermine future resources investments. There is no benefit to an industry that no longer exists. And the Coalition will not be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.